So ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Good afternoon. That's more like it. The post-lunch lull, as I call it. Okay, so Mats, thank you very much. Before I go into this exploration of the research that Mats is referring to, I just want to mention a little bit around what we do as an organization, because actually research is enough to send anyone into terminal boredom just at the mention of it. But actually, this is not the way I view it. This is about the changes we're seeing in the sales and marketing world that actually are so dramatic that they actually mirror a lot of what we're seeing in the digitalization that you described in your business areas this morning. Because actually what we're seeing is this disruption that's coming into the marketplace from technology players. The speed at which technology players are starting to challenge our traditional business models is actually causing all sorts of challenges. And we see those same challenges in the sales and marketing space. So the same way that if you think about manufacturing 4.0, Internet of Things, the speed at which you are trying to innovate to keep up with these things that you've probably heard about called clock speeds, the clock speed of customers' desires and needs, and the speed at which we have to meet them being balanced against the clock speeds at which we can innovate and produce new products, new services. Well, actually, sales and marketing sits in the middle of that process, and they're having a real battle trying to keep up with this. We're seeing win rates globally are down across all industries. And in fact, CMOs, so chief marketing officers, who 80% of their activities are designed to be revenue generating, are actually only seeing a third of that return come back as financial impact. So what on earth is happening out there? How do we grow in this ever-changing environment if that's what we're seeing across sales and marketing? So we looked at this, but before we looked at this from let's call it a scientific or a research perspective, we talked to lots of sales leaders. So we have over 1,000 sales leaders are members of what we call our Sales Leadership Council, so our sales practice. And from them, we've been hearing the same things for the last 5 to 10 years, but the drumbeat seems to be getting louder. The first is this explosion of information. For the first time, our customers know more about us than we know about them. Even in your business, in your highly technical, highly engineered services, they can get this information from product brochures, from the internet, from your competitors, from independent sources. So digitalization, or the digital world, is here now, which means they have information. The second battle that we hear sales leaders talking about is actually selling's getting tougher, as I alluded to a moment ago, and partly because purchasers are getting tougher. So purchasing people are becoming more professional, they're becoming more present in our day-to-day dealings. And actually, they're starting to get involved at a much earlier stage and distancing us from the stakeholders we should be talking to. We still have those conversations, but it seems to be that these procurement people are getting in the middle of it, and they're getting more disciplined and more effective at their jobs. And we're seeing more people coming into the decision-making process. So what does that mean? Well, 20 years ago when I started in sales as a rep, you could go and see your key influencer, maybe two. You'd try and build some kind of cohesive argument that they would buy into, they'd become your internal champion, and then they would take you to the decision maker and make the case for you. You'd beat a path to that corner office and get the deal. It doesn't seem to work like that anymore. Now, there are multiple diverse stakeholders emerging from all angles, some visible, some not visible. So if you think to your own businesses, you'll know what I'm talking about. They're the people that pop up during that sales process that suddenly at the last minute have something to say and can actually stop the progression of that deal or veto it. And fourthly, customers want more, right? This is a customer-centric environment we live in. The age of the customer is here. They want more and more, but they're not necessarily willing to pay for it. And this is what we're hearing more and more from sales leaders. And finally, probably our favorite friends, how many of you probably have been in a sales process, you've got more or less to the point where you think the deal's done, and up pops the consultant, wanting to just review costs again, or try and get more out of the deal again. So customers are getting empowered, and they're getting complex. So we set about trying to study what is actually happening in the buying world. So we talked to these 5,000 buyers that Matt's referred to across all industries to try and understand what is going on out there. And actually, it can be summarized in this very large, very simplified version of a buying process in the form of this blue arrow. Now, in this blue arrow, a lot of things are happening. But actually, the key on this, or the key point that I want to convey around this, is simply put, buyers are engaging us later and later in the process. In fact, it's 57% of the way through the process, typically. So if you take a buying process from 0 to 100 steps, imagine those 100 steps, it's not until step 57 that they actually reach out and have a meaningful conversation around your offer, or in a position to evaluate your offer. So what are they doing during that time? What's happening in that blue arrow? Well, actually, they're learning on their own. They're learning everything they need to know about that need. They're building internal teams. They're downloading your content, absolutely, but they're also downloading content from other sources as well. And they're building an understanding of what the solution needs to be using those internal teams, then putting it to procurement, who then reach out to engage with us to start that evaluation process. Now, it's not that we're not having those conversations earlier sometimes, but actually those conversations often are just to provide information. So you're actually still in that cycle. You're not actually engaging with them and partnering with them in the way that we'd like to. So that's one thing. The second thing is, if that's what's happening, some sales leaders have said to us, do we even need salespeople in the middle? Can we just invest all of our money into e-commerce, digital platforms that allow us to get our content out there, bid management? Let's put a bid management process to try and drive down the lowest possible unit cost of supplying that product, no matter how technical, because it's clear that customers are commoditizing what we do. Even in very, very technical applications, we're seeing this all the time. So that's the first thing. We're seeing this in pharma. We're seeing actually armies of salespeople being repurposed into different roles because customers are not having these conversations in the way that we would like to be having them. So that investment into building customer intimacy, building an understanding of what the customer needs, actually often is wasted investment because customers are not willing to have that conversation with us. From a marketing perspective, look at it another way. We're trying to engage with them early in that process to influence their understanding of their needs in order to try and lead them towards our offers. The problem is the 45% of marketing budget that is spent on content, digital or otherwise, only 1% of the leads that are generated by marketing actually generate revenue, turn into real revenue. So it's a pretty unpleasant place to be in sales at the moment. And most salespeople recognize this. They just haven't seen the data to support it. So if customers are getting more empowered and more complex, does that mean that they're necessarily getting better at buying? Well, actually, there's a deeper story to this, and it's one of dysfunction. What you'll see here is actually a graph that shows when we plot the number of stakeholders involved in a typical buying process, what their likelihood is in purchasing. Not purchasing from you, but purchasing. And you'll see that when we cut this study 2-3 years ago, the average number of stakeholders was 5.4. When we cut it again late last year, it's already gone up to 6.8. That's a 25% increase in 2 years. Now, if you look at what that does to the graph, you can see that the purchasing likelihood drops to nearly 30%. That means that they're deferring deals They're delaying deals. They're redescribing the specification. They're putting projects off because they cannot form a consensus around what it is that they need and what the solution needs to be. Now, people may recognize that in some of their own client interactions. Those projects that you win through RFP often even don't complete the contract. And that's the reason why. Because they cannot get those different diverse stakeholders to agree on what they need sometimes, never mind what the solution is or who should provide it. So you hear about it, but you don't necessarily see it to its conclusion. And if you think about it, intuitively that makes sense. A head of manufacturing has a completely different set of needs from a project than a head of R&D, or even a CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, that's getting more and more involved in purchasing activities. So the battle isn't just for us to win the deals, it's the battle to get the customer to even complete the purchase in the first place, more often than not. So bigger groups, fewer purchases. So if that is the environment we're living in, how on earth do we drive loyalty? The subject of the day is growth. Growth is our oxygen, and it is for all organizations, really. So how do we drive growth? Or do we just rely on the market to grow and we grow with it and we try and win bits of market share here and there? How do we drive meaningful new demand in that environment I just described? And actually the answer is much simpler than we probably thought. So we commissioned another study, and the data you see in front of you here is the results of that study. And this was looking at the loyalty drivers in purchasing. So this is not NPS scores. This is not looking at customer satisfaction post-purchase. This is actually, when you're buying something, what is more likely to make you loyal? And the results that came back actually have probably made it into more boardrooms and more boardroom discussions, certainly that I've been involved in, than probably any other piece of data that CB's produced. And it's for this reason. When we actually look at what drives loyalty, the things that we assumed, and think about the proud heritage of Atlas Copco in the engineering world, the products, the services, the price to value ratio, those things that we spend all our life building as our innovation effort, as our value proposition, combined only account for 47% of the loyalty factor in buying. 47% combined. Now, before everyone has a collective heart attack, that's not to say it's not important. In fact, far from it, because we were also shocked. When we actually studied it more deeply, we realized it's not that these things weren't unimportant. Those blue boxes are not unimportant. They're actually critical. You have to have them. This is what you have to be invited. This is what the price or the ticket of admission is into the buying process. These are the table stakes. You have to have these things. But they're not seen as the biggest areas of differentiation to a customer. Unfortunately, they're just not, whether we like it or not. I'm going to pick on Gert, unfortunately, who pointed out the 4 or 5 vacuum pump technology units. That's the best way I'll describe them as. And he himself admitted they look very similar, but there are differentiators in there. And it's probably hard for us to spot visually. Think about it from a customer perspective when they're buying. The buyer mentality is to go for good enough, because they have to try and satisfy building that consensus. So we're missing the big orange bar, which is probably you've spotted already, says sales experience. This is in fact the purchasing experience. And this is what they meant. And actually as we go through this starts to make a lot of sense if you think back to that dysfunction that I described earlier. When we unpacked or asked them to unpack what they meant about this buying experience, they mentioned the first thing was, teach me something new. Teach me something about my world, my clients, my marketplace that I can't get from anyone else inside my business. Because actually, I'm living in a bit of a silo here. The way that we buy is we are buying in a silo, which means that we've created this monster. We're not actually getting as much insightful information as we would like. So teach me something new. Secondly and thirdly, help me navigate alternatives, help me avoid mistakes, help me buy, because buying is tough. We just explored that. Buying is really tough. They know how many of these deals don't proceed. So you're doing this hundreds of times a day as an organization. We perhaps make this investment once every 5 years. Help us make this journey easier. Advise us. And teach me about new outcomes. Don't send me white papers. Teach me about real outcomes and real issues. And lastly, because we know how tough it is to be supported, to drive consensus, help me build that consensus, because we know otherwise we're not going to move forward. You're not going to get the deal and we're not going to move forward. So for us, this was interesting. If this is what customers are craving as an experience, who's delivering this experience? Because somebody is. It's not the traditional sales, I guess, attributes that we would assume or think. So we conducted this study that Matt's mentioned, and it's in a book that you're going to have given to you in your goodie bags. But it looked at these 5 sales or seller types, which I won't go into detail today, but actually the winner, the one that came out on top, and I'll list them if you can't read it, is there was a relationship builder, a problem solver, a hard worker, a challenger, and a lone wolf. Now, the lone wolf is interesting in itself, but the challenger was the one that came out on top in all sales environments. And when we actually dialed up the complexity of the deals and the organizations and the transaction types that we're analyzing, they became even more successful. And in fact, the relationship builder, the one that you see in the complex example, only is represented as 4% across high performers, almost disappears entirely, which is slightly worrying for heads of sales, because this is actually where they've invested perhaps most of their money in sales talent over the last 10, 20 years, trying to build that customer intimacy. So what do they do differently? Well, they do lots of things differently, but they do have relationships as well. It's just they leverage them differently. And if I was to simplify it, they do 3 things very well. They teach their customers around new issues. They create and deliver insights based on their knowledge of the business and of their client's business. And they tailor those messages to those stakeholders that they know they have to get on board because they are diverse, they do have different interests. And finally, they take control of the buying process or the sales process, which is they know that if they don't drive momentum when they've built that burning platform for those buyers, that probably that consensus is going to unravel anyway. Guess what? That lines up almost exactly with what buyers said they wanted as an experience. So the very things that buyers said that they wanted are the very things that challengers were delivering. So there was no wonder that these guys were so successful, even in flat or even down economies. So the smart people in the room who've probably looked at this have said, this is all great, I understand this, but what about that 57% you described? I thought they weren't engaging us until later. And actually, there is some truth in that. And in fact, challengers probably don't want to be coming in at that late stage if you're likely to win that deal anyway and be overly disruptive. So the way in which we have to be disruptive, the way that challengers do it is earlier in the journey. And actually, marketing have a role to play in this. Because customers have to be taken on a different learning path, and we do that at the point that they're learning about their needs. And so the content we put out is critical in this case. We have to make sure that it's capable of sparking an interest. And it's different to white papers, and I'll show you an example of what I mean in a moment. It has to introduce these insights in a way that are actually going to take the customer away from what their trajectory was going to be. And it has to confront them in a way that actually builds that burning platform. What does it mean to me if I get this wrong? What do you teach me about my business that's costing me more than I realized? And then finally, if you can take that journey into a trained seller who knows how to have that conversation, you can't stop the customer from going through the process they're going to go through, if that's what their corporate governance requires. But at least their sellers, or your seller, is able to have that conversation now. And it's on a way that uniquely favors your products and services. Now, to show you what I mean, take a look at this.
sheep never realize there's a wolf around until it's too late. Then they do exactly what the wolf expects them to do. They run into each other, they fall down, they become dinner. Time to eat. They've got no idea I use my phone to hack the OS on that printer over there. And why would they? Not one printer in this place has built-in malware protection. Now, while they're all busy watching a little something I threw up on the control panel,
Just look at your screen.
I can intercept all their print jobs until I find the info I'm looking for. Ooh, yeah, today's somebody's birthday. Perfect. The really good stuff is upstairs. The kind of stuff that could destroy any future this grand financial institution could hope to have.
Pretty impressive, eh? That's B2B. It's not B2C. And they didn't talk about their product once until the very end. When I showed this to a commercial leader in the financial services sector, guess what conversation he had the following day with his CIO? Have we got this covered? Because I'm worried about this. And I wonder if HP got that deal. So it can be done, but that's what we mean by insight. It's talking about customer problems and identifying those unmet needs. So finally for me, how do we build this? If it's about building challenges, it's about building content, how do we do this as an organization? And really there's a three-legged stool approach to this. We can keep it going with one or two pieces, but we need all three pieces. Sellers can be taught challenger skills, and they like it. They actually like going to the marketplace with new conversations. And we've seen from the studies that they can improve their attainment to goal by 14%. So think what that does to your top line. Managers are also key though. If you're not driving this vision, if you're not changing the way that you go to market, then actually that training will be lost, that development will be lost, even within 30 days, never mind months. And lastly, you've got to be able to build those insights. And that's marketing, working with product, working with R&D, working with sales, to build those insights that will resonate with customers. And in that way, you can actually start to drive meaningful growth and disrupt actually the customer's buying process in a very advantageous way to yourself. I've got some key takeaways, but I think with the time that we've got, probably Matt's wanted to, no, you're happy for me to carry on. So the key takeaways, a lot of data, a lot of concepts. Number one, customers are learning on their own, and they're commoditizing your best and most valuable product offerings. Make no mistake. Doesn't matter how technically advanced you are, it is only a matter of time before they drive that process. Number two, customer loyalty comes not from just innovating those products, they are important, but from challenging the customers constructively early in their buying process. Three, the best salespeople and organizations use insights to disrupt the customer buying journey. Rather than talking about their products or asking what the customer needs, they come with insight. They come and teach the customer something valuable. And lastly, the way that you try and build that challenger experience for a customer means that sales, management, marketing have to work together to be able to create that capability. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. I find this extremely interesting, I must say, considering we're talking about adding value to the customers. So I think there's something here for us to learn. Can you also give us a little bit an insight on, are there other companies implementing these strategies right now?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, industrial companies tend to be quite secretive. So I have loads of examples from the industrial space, but none that I can share. But one I can certainly share is Xerox, who adopted this very model. And they built an entire insight around selling photocopiers into the North American school space, so the K-12 schools market, completely driven by cost, by total cost of ownership, reducing maintenance. So their spec was black and white. HP managed to completely reframe this by discovering that actually learning outcomes are impacted by color. They knew this from their own knowledge and their own research. So they were able to build this entire insight around learning outcomes and therefore opened up completely new stakeholders, including heads of curriculum and head teachers, purely to sell a color printer that they had the most effective, most optimized price for, which meant that actually using that message, building the content around it, they were able to actually drive up their hit rates on their website by 81%, their sales or revenue from that campaign by 18%, and overall it contributed $45 million to that segment alone. So that was a completely integrated example of what we described.
And I love the movie. The other thing I was thinking about, when we look at the sales profiles, the lone wolf, the relationship, and of course we recognize them. But is it possible to go to be a challenger? Can we train people? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. That comes up a lot. So the challenges that we found are native. They're in your organization now. So we found them across all organizations, and they usually represent maybe 17% of your organization, typically. But the non-challengers can be developed. The relationship builders, the hard workers, engineers in particular, sales engineers, actually are offered the best at converting to this model because they're eager to learn. They have great product knowledge. They have great customer experiences. They just need to find a way to leverage it. So we found that actually, probably in 60 to 70% of cases, non-challengers can become challengers over time.
That's very good news, I think. And why should we focus on this right now, do you think?
I think it goes back to what you've all been talking about this morning, what I started with. Even when you're growing and your numbers are very impressive, you appear to be a leader in your respective categories, in your respective business areas, but the market's changing all the time. We can't innovate at the speed that we'd like to. So actually, this is the fastest way that we can innovate for customers with our existing products, because we're innovating different commercial conversations that customers are willing to pay us for. So for me, that is true innovation from a sales and marketing perspective. And if you can put that together with your fantastic product innovation that you've got in the pipeline, that's very powerful.
Okay, thank you very much. This could probably be a couple of days seminar instead of just 30 minutes, spot on, right?
Yeah.
But we gave you a little bit of a teaser here. We also gave you the book. And of course, I think your organization is willing to discuss with us. So I'm getting 10% commission.
Did I not send it already?
But I think it's actually, I've looked at it for maybe a year and a half now. I think it is moving in this direction. And we need to get in early. Otherwise, we will talking about price. And then we will lose. Thank you very much. Fantastic presentation. Big hands. Hey.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.